All right. Super excited today. This is a conversation that's been coming up a lot more and more of that we need to have. It's about cybersecurity PR. Speaking to cybersecurity experts is different than speaking from, let's say, other professionals. They have a different kind of ear. They have a better bullshit and sniff test naturally because they're always looking for, let's say, vulnerabilities. And this makes a unique audience. And we've been able to build the trust in the relationship. That's why I'm really happy and excited to have our guest today, Yehudah Sunshine from Cyfluencer. Yehudah Sunshine first started doing cybersecurity PR for a startup in Israel called Odix, a cybersecurity company. When he joined Cyfluencer, a cybersecurity influencer marketing distribution platform, he continued to develop his cybersecurity relationships in order to best improve our influencer marketing for Cyfluencer's clients. Through the trust that he's built, both in publications and through cybersecurity professionals, he has earned last year cybersecurity 40 under 40. And through that, he's been able to actually even get better relationships and better publications that he's able to place his clients on for Cyfluencer for cybersecurity PR. That was a long intro, but Yehudah, I'm happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Yoel. It's a lot to kind of take in, and a lot of kind words. I appreciate it, and I look forward to kind of sharing with our audience what I've learned in this process.
All right, so let's jump right in. Well, first and foremost, I'm going to ask you a question we all love or hate. I don't know. What is the ROI of PR? We'll start easy, and we're going to get into the cybersecurity PR specifically, publication questions, and how telling your voice in cyber is different. But let's tackle some fun PR questions in general. So is there an ROI in PR?
Yes. I think that PR is a little bit different than other things that are in the brand awareness category, because you can kind of point your finger to a podcast, an analyst briefing, a media placement, or an op-ed placement, and it gives you something that you can kind of go as a basis. Also, when you're trying to talk about how you're going to position your company towards investors, very often they say, I saw you in TechCrunch, I saw you in Cyber Defense, I saw you in all these different places. And through that understanding, I either connect more with your executives and I feel with your story, or I want to learn more and I kind of did a little bit more research. So in other brand awareness techniques, it's a little bit difficult to gauge it. With PR, you can kind of touch these little things where you say, I had these meetings, I had these media opportunities. This is something that I can kind of use to elevate.
Got it. So, it kind of reminds me a little bit when people ask, what's the ROI on influencer marketing or Cyfluencer, right? Is that, in a sense, would you say that's the wrong question to ask?
I mean, it's a little bit tricky, because I think that Cyfluencer provides something that's similar in so much as it's getting your name out there and your thought leadership, but it's kind of using these influencers versus traditional media streams and more progressive earned media platforms like podcasts, and to kind of tell your story in a different way. So I think that in PR, you work with your PR professional to kind of craft that story. With Cyfluencer, you kind of create that thought leadership, and then you push it out to the world and kind of use the influencers to kind of direct it on their own.
When I told a friend of mine who's a PR expert, that we've been expanding our cybersecurity PR offerings, and he goes, "Oh, cybersecurity PR is so boring." What do you? And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "The story is there isn't much there. It's extremely technical. There's nothing sexy about it. There's no like cool, sexy videos. Let's say like green tech, you know what I mean, or some other things, or food tech, agriculture tech, etc." It doesn't feel very tangible in a sense, which is probably why so many people neglect cybersecurity in general, because it's not, you can't feel it, you can't touch it, so to speak. Would you agree that cybersecurity PR is boring, or would you just say, or is that for the publications? Is that for the readers? Would you say cybersecurity? I know I'm unloading a bunch of questions here, but they're all related. Would you say cybersecurity professionals that are reading a PR piece about cybersecurity, would they find it as interested as a professional in a different industry?
So I don't know. I think that as a general rule, PR is a lot more boring than you think. That everybody thinks that you have a really exciting story, that you have this pitch that's going to wipe everybody off the table, and in actuality, the journalists have heard it a million times and nobody cares. I think that what makes it
Right.
more interesting in cybersecurity is that you have the opportunity to get through that sales cycle and that really product heavy pitch and go into something where these people have really interesting experiences. A lot of people have an interesting military background. They have something tactile that they've worked in, that they've overcome adversity to have a tangible benefit for their company or to save them for loss. So I think that it's a lot less abstract when you go into the story, and then it becomes more interesting. I think the problem becomes when companies think that some partnership is going to completely and totally change the waters. Some minor funding, if we're talking funding less than 10, 15, $20 million, other companies are getting this too. You need to be able to think about, how am I going to position myself outside of the money and the friends into more of, how are my executives going to become thought leaders? How am I going to have VC be able to understand me in not such a black and white way? And I think that that's really accomplished through analyst briefings, where you get in front of Gartner, you get in front of Marsh, you get in front of Forrester, you explain to them what your problems are and what you address. They really break it down, and then you go on a podcast, and then you relate to people in a way where you can remove that jargon and you understand what's going on. So it's kind of this cumulative thing. And I think in cybersecurity, it's easy to get lost in the technology or the ephemeral nature of it. It's a lot more precise to say, the way to make this accessible is to frame the executives, to frame the story, to frame the experiences. And that's kind of going into how PR works in general.
Well, so how do you frame it? And if anyone's listening to want to ask a question, they're welcome to. We'll pull it up. We'll answer your questions. How would you frame it?
I think that the big thing that you frame is a lot of executives, like when I'm talking to a company and they're saying, are we a candidate for PR? I want to go into this. What could it do? Well, I say, maybe it's not about your product release, and maybe it's not about this partnership. Who in your executive team has dealt with a major breach and been able to get out of it, or has learned something from it? Who's had an experience that our customers and vendors and partners can really relate to? And when you bring those points down, then it becomes more accessible. That's really what I tell them, because it's really hard to try and think what's going to be the technology that changes everything. It's a lot easier to say, people want to hear your story and approach it, and that's going to be our inroad to be able to build this content media strategy and to build these touch points to be able to get your story out there.
Do people actually want to read and listen to these stories? I mean, I think of, like, I would say, and I'm coming as a non-PR expert, which is what makes this conversation great. So I can ask questions from my place of ignorance, right? There are different kinds of PR, let's say, in our space. There might be announcement of, let's say, raising money. That would be one, right? Number two, maybe a strategic partnership between two cybersecurity companies, maybe through an MSP, or, and they want people to know that they're doing that too. What are other kinds of cybersecurity PRs that we see generally, if you were to define, put them in the categories?
So there's the exciting kind and the not exciting kind. The exciting kind, we're talking about damage control, where you're trying to get in front of a story. You're trying to be able to proactively put out op-eds to be able to get your story out there. You don't want to be in that situation, but from a PR perspective, that's something that gets your juices moving. But then we have things that are more traditionally impactful, like analyst briefings, where you're, instead of saying, we're going to spend $50,000 to get in front of Gartner, we're going to brief Gartner, we're going to brief these big houses, and we're going to get their insights in real time. Another thing that's really coming up and is really big is podcasts. And that's something that we can kind of talk about more in depth and how it's a little bit tricky. But these are kind of non-traditional avenues to be able to get yourself out there, because we say press releases, you distribute this, you get an interview, but what we really want is an op-ed where your executive gets to tell your story. You want to get onto a video where somebody can really put their face to it.
So if it's so let's just say you have, like, let's put out, we have a great question comment here from Dimitri. I'll pull up in a minute, but you're onto something here. If you have a PR piece, and let's say someone's like, the top, the fastest growing cybersecurity companies for 2022. right? And they list 5 or 10, and you're one of them. That doesn't help, really, does it? Mostly VCs, right?
So it really depends.
What I'd like to do here with these questions, the reason why I'm asking is I want us to be able to properly define what kind of PR, because we're going to talk about podcasts, we're talking about video, right? Like, I would say if 100 people watch this conversation, listen to it, let's say it's a 40-minute conversation, I think they'd get far more value than, let's say, if they read the transcript, right? They would see us and all that, right? Or if it was an interview, right? Like an interview in writing, or then even more so that than if it was a quote, right? Or a paragraph or something.
And it stays with you, and you're more emotionally connected to it, and you bring it out later, and it drives you. So, I mean, these are different channels that people really connect with more. But I think that it's difficult because with podcasts, especially, I can go to the client and it's really about defining success. So are we saying that we're going to establish this list of podcasts and this is what we're looking for, that we're going to A/B test our tech department. Maybe we're going to ask our clients what they're listening to, because it's tricky to be able to see who is the right avenue. And then on another level, how can you gauge what's come out of that? Because if you're on 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 podcasts, for someone to point one out and say this completely and totally changed my buying cycle is also unrealistic. So it's a little bit tricky to kind of pull all of these individual things apart. I think that's why you need to go with the client and kind of sit down with the strategy and say, what do we intend to achieve by this? And maybe on my end, an industry award is a huge thing. And that's a whole process of figuring out which one's legit and which one's bullshit, and which one's the pay for play and which one is something that people respect. But it's about kind of sitting with the executives and blending what's a traditional achievement or something that we can understand as success and ROI, and blending that with what the PR professional is going to say, where I have these new avenues that you haven't heard about that are going to pay dividends, but you can't necessarily see it right now.
Right, got it. So Dimitri's got a good question here, right? The whole cybersecurity industry is a response to a business problem, which is a wonderful way of actually explaining what cybersecurity is. Why not concentrate on business problems and cover clear examples of the vendor helping the business customers make progress in their cybersecurity programs?
This sounds almost like a case study,
right?
And yeah,
in a sense, just what he's saying, a mini case study is like, hey, we helped, Target after its data breach. How we helped them recover and secure them, And so you would write, I guess, kind of like a case study, I guess, right?
Well, it depends on the journalist. Like, I've worked with some journalists who say, we're really looking for this technology, a vendor in this region, and a quote from this level executive. Give me this and I'm ready to go. Others want to have something where they're going to package it in their own light. So they'll say your technology, your story is going to be featured, and they don't necessarily want to see it through the lens of your customer and how you're navigating it. And that's why in a situation like this, I would say the client should push more towards op-eds versus interviews, because then in the op-ed, they can tell their story, versus in the interview where the journalist is going to be kind of dictating what the scope of the article or the context will be.
Right. Got it. That's interesting, because in a way, I would generally think that an interview, I can tell my story better, but I'm often the one doing the interviewing. And so it's a good point that you get. I didn't think of it from that lens. Well, you're responding to questions in the conversation. So like, I'm leading this conversation. You're the cyber PR expert. So in a sense, you might want to have a story that you want to share, but if you're not able to work into the conversation, you can't. When you get to stop, think, and write out an op-ed, you're able to work out and tell your story. But you're saying earlier
and you can use that as the jumping off point. Like, I find that.
So give an example.
I find with clients, if I can get 2, 3, 4 op-eds out there, then the conversation that we're going to have in the interview is going to be about the topics that they discuss and they put out there, because they become an expert in those things, versus the journalist kind of either throwing darts or trying to use their power to dictate the interview. Here, you've already established what the track you want to take is. This is I'm writing about information security and critical infrastructure, and I'm writing about the core technologies that are going to be able to protect it. Well, if this is what I'm putting out there, there's nothing else to talk to me about. because I've already established that identity and that persona as a thought leader. So that's something that we kind of talk about as well, where how do you want to control your story? So part of it is you need to refine which executives. I don't think it's a good idea to have 7 executives out there and everybody is being thrown out because you think that this person is going to fit or that person is going to fit. You need to pick 1 or 2. They're going to be the feature. You're going to highlight them in different ways. So then when you have an interview, when you have the next step, you've kind of laid that foundation, laid that groundwork.
Got it. Understood. Cool. That's a good point. All right. We have another comment here. It just says LinkedIn user, but I can see on LinkedIn who he or she is. A woman named Dawn Christie. She's a third connection.
That's the Cyber Dawn, a good friend of Cyfluencer.
Okay. But she's only third connection for me. What's up, Dawn? Send me connection request. Hey, Yehudah, what about social responsibility as a basis for the PR? Show what you did right or wrong and how you'd responded and were on top of it due to resilience. There's one word here I want to pull out. Mm-hmm. Show what you did wrong. Let's start with that.
So
is there a benefit of highlighting your mistakes? And then obviously you would say how I overcome it. It's like in an interview, Yehudah, please tell us, what are your weaknesses? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's my favorite.
My weakness is I wake up so early and start working. That's some bullshit.
Yeah, it's my dedication to the team is so overbearing that I sometimes forget to breathe and to eat. So this is something that's a little bit tricky because from a PR perspective, you want to get as much coverage as possible. And sometimes that means taking a greater level of accountability. From a company perspective, they're representing themselves. They will almost never admit any guilt, any accountability that beyond what they have to. They're not going to name any names. They're not going to admit a breach or anything because there's a very limited window in which they can jump into this story. And if there's 1 or 2 stories that are about them and half of it is about their previous mistakes and their previous breaches, it's very, very tricky to position it right. So I think that if you could put in a story and be given the space, I think it's great. I think that it's very, very difficult to convince companies to even give a little bit of the chink in the armor.
Got it. Awesome. And so social responsibility as a basis of PR. I mean, I don't know. I feel like in the cybersecurity sense that social responsibility is different than, let's say, other industries would define social responsibility. But I mean, like, we know, like, we did some giveaways for the cyber community, and we were giving it to help troubled youth to get into cybersecurity and all kinds of different nonprofits that are associated with that. Do you think you can do PR really around that in a sense, or I wonder sometimes, like, let me have a follow-up question because it's kind of related. That do you have, and then so maybe it's a pivot. If like you have a retainer client, right? And sometimes they have good content for PR, and sometimes they don't, but they want to still get their PR. They want to get out there. How do you create a story? So like you can always go ahead and be proactively socially responsible. Is that one way to make a story? Do people like, especially in cybersecurity, do they like sniff through that bullshit?
I mean, I think that it has to be sincere. It has to be within the company's core mission. So if you're going to put out a social responsibility story that, this company is partnering with cyber veterans and blah, 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 they're going to sniff you out very quickly if they think that it's just for PR purposes.
Very quickly, yeah.
And then I think that it's complicated because you're trying to tell a story and you don't want to come off as self-righteous, and you also want to think about where it's going to get published. So when you're thinking about social responsibility, are we talking about writing, a New York Times weekend 20,000 word piece about, the story of this hack and how we came through it? Is anybody going to stick with it? Or is it kind of this shorter attention cycle and how we're going to be able to get people's attention? So it's complicated. And I think that for most companies, when they're looking for ROI, this is something that's going to be very difficult to get ROI from. So let's say I get the placement. Somebody wants me to pull on the heartstrings. I write this story about a breach. They overcame it. That's great. But now they have to quantify what that got them. So is somebody going to come up to them and say, I saw you overcame this breach? How is this going to show them their potential customers or potential investors that they're going in the right direction and it's something actionable. It's difficult.
Okay, this is from, I don't know why I'm saying LinkedIn user because she's a good friend and first connection. This is from Susan Becker. Brilliant woman. In my experience, good PR in cyber is very dependent on a deep budget, unless the technology is completely radical, disruptive, or amazing. What do you think?
I mean, I think that,
and maybe we should talk dollars here. Like, let's not be taboo.
Yeah, we don't need to mince words here. So I think that there's a difference between pay for play and the merit of technology and thought leadership being able to get through, and also understanding different venues and avenues for your PR to make impact. Excuse me. So if you're saying the only success for me is getting in TechCrunch, well, I'm going to need to get a big investment to get into TechCrunch, or my technology is going to be approachable enough where people can really get into it. If you say that success for me is going to be the total number of publications, the total number of podcasts, the total number of briefings with analysts, and the ability over time to be able to increase that or bring that into different markets, then it's something where you're creating results and you're making it more approachable. I think that the problem becomes what is the objective for cyber PR? Is this something?
I think that is the main question of probably the entire conversation.
Yeah. Is this lead gen? Is this you want to get a bunch of money? Is this that you're getting this push that we just got a bunch of money and nobody's ever heard of us, so we now need to fill in the gap? I think that it's very difficult because a lot of marketing teams aren't really sure what they're looking for. They just know that when they get these results from the PR guy, it's not enough. And it's like, you need to be realistic in what the results are. Maybe your technology is super confusing. Maybe you're misreading the broad market.
What are the results? Well, let's get topless.
What are the results? I think that it's consistency in publications. You don't always want the same publication too, because we're talking about there's Cyber Defense Magazine, there's Cybercrime, there's Cyber Protection, there's Forbes, there's all these, there's Dark Reading. But if you're only in one, then you're not having the ability to get different audiences that are also relevant for your core market. So I think that it's diversifying it, it's seeing where the crossover is with other industries, and it's defining what the results are. I think if you go to your PR guy and say, here's $3,000, I'm going to give you $3,000 a month. I'm going to call you when there's a release, and I hope to hell that when we get this release, it's going to be great. That doesn't really work. The idea of a retainer is, I'm thinking 3, 6, 9 months ahead. What are we going to have as these benchmarks? So when we drop your press release, we get that next level of coverage. Are we looking for VC? Are we looking for buyers? Are we looking for channel partners? How are we going to approach this? And I've had some clients who have said, we don't care about all this coverage. We only want these 4 publications, because having everybody under the sun know about us doesn't mean shit. What we're looking for is these 2 or these 3 industry publications, and that for us justifies the money. And I think that the big thing that you need to be clear is, what are we looking for? And having these strategic calls. That's why if the company on the PR professional side, you see the company just doesn't understand what the results are going to be, and they keep on pushing you and then expecting these things that you can't produce, you need to be honest with them and say, it's like, this is, as we said, part of the brand awareness spectrum more than the lead gen spectrum. We can mix in sponsored content, we can mix in different placements and different kinds of sponsorship, but there's what we can do and what we can't do. And I think if you're not clear in that, then you get a lot of disappointed customers who don't understand what the results are.
Awesome. Danielle asks, do you think being on the Forbes Tech Council is seen as impressive? And maybe if you can give also some other similar parallels to the Forbes Tech Council. And if, should it be focusing on co-founder or on the product?
So I actually...
How does one get on? Sorry, before you get there. What is the Forbes Tech Council?
Forbes Tech Council, how do you get on?
How does why don't you give us catch us up 90 seconds?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the Forbes Tech Council. I think that clients like
What is it?
So excuse me, y'all. You're so impatient here. I like it. Let me introduce to you what I like.
All right, I'll take another sip of Coke.
Okay, you can even mute yourself, and I can even talk. It's fine. He pays my check, so let me see if I can try that one more time. I don't think so. So the Forbes Tech Council isn't like Forbes itself, where it has the journalists who are writing all these articles. It gives executives the opportunity to get in front of the thought leadership and then project it through Forbes, and then it can be shared through their platform. It has a little bit more gravitas. It also has an editorial process where they kind of go back.
Got it. So that's okay. So the editorial process is what makes it good.
That's what I like about it.
Because sometimes people say, "Oh, $5,000, I can get you on Forbes or whatever," right? Mm-hmm. And this way, you don't have to worry about some it's editorial. It's been pre-read, pre-vetted,
and you can technology. You can work with them. If you want to pay more, you can work with them, and they can ghostwrite your articles as well. I found that what the Forbes Tech Council was really great for is if you have an in-house marketing team, you have an in-house content writer who you actually trust. This is really for a native English language speaker because you don't want to waste the opportunities going back and forth in these drafts. And somebody who you really understands the brand vision, then you can make the most of this, because in a year you could theoretically, like when I was doing it at Odix, I think we got 8 or 10 articles out in a year, and we were really pushing the editorial process and making sure that we gave them was really top notch. But that gave us this level to mix in with our internal publications and kind of augment what the PR team did. So I'm a fan of it, but I definitely understand. It has a price. I think last time I checked, it was like $2,500 for a year to participate. There's a network with executives that I think is really valuable. For the second part of the question, I think it really should be co-founder based. Just basically in the editorial process, if anything is product based, they're going to throw it out. So don't even waste your time.
Interesting. So you got some really good expert insights in the Forbes Tech Council. Well, why would they throw out your product? Why wouldn't they be? Why are they more interested in a co-founder or an executive than a product?
Because the stories are editorial and they're more subject driven. They can be about pressure points, but they explicitly say not to be product driven and to not really be this name dropping sales thing. Like the idea is to elevate your thought leadership, but not to kind of sneak in a sales pitch. And they're not joking around with it. And I think that's why, from my perspective, the articles that I've seen from the other executives and the other content teams there were actually really good and really insightful. And that's why they were getting shared.
Awesome. Dimitri asks, a lot of journalists are trying to improve that from our audience.
Ephemeral audience.
Thank you. Yes, English is my first language, so bear with me. Basically trying to social engineer cybersecurity professionals when they haven't put in the work and understand the value they bring to our jobs. I think cybersecurity, I'll give my opinion, then I'll let you actually answer the question. I think cybersecurity professionals, and I was kind of touching on this in the beginning, they have a unique ear and bullshit sniff test. I don't think you can, socially engineer cybersecurity professionals.
Let's talk about influencer marketing. Let's talk about influencer marketing with cybersecurity professionals versus influencer marketing with other professionals.
Perfect. Love it.
The big thing that makes cyber different is we're looking for people who have like 10 years of experience, who are in the C-suite, who have been in the trenches. And their response is not something that's like a 30-second TikTok where they crack open a Pepsi. It's a technical review. It's an in-depth understanding based off of, these hard-fought, detailed and very, very, precise analyses. And I think that it's something where in other industries, it could be something that's a lot more superficial. In cybersecurity, they're really looking for these influencers as somebody where, do they know their shit? If they do, I'm going to trust them, and then that's going to be able to build this brand understanding in this relationship. If they don't, then I'm going to drop it like a ton of bricks.
So then why would they trust a publication such as Forbes that just runs all kind of generic tech content as opposed to Dark Reading, Cyber Mag, or some other cybersecurity website?
I mean, everything has an editorial process. I think Forbes is a different editorial process and it's a little bit broader. But if I'm looking at Forbes, I think that it's a different level in the funnel. It's something that's a little bit higher. It's something that's a little bit more accessible. When I go into, cyber defense, cyber protection, when I go into info security, all these things, I'm a little bit further down. I'm speaking to a slightly different, more technical audience. especially with Forbes. If I'm trying to approach if I'm a PR guy and I'm trying to approach the board and say what's successful, they might not know these random cyber publications, but they say, I know Forbes, I know, TechCrunch, I know this thing. That could be enough to kind of help your marketing budget and help you show what that ROI is. Because as we're saying, it's a mix of being able to drive those people in and have that name recognition.
So if you were to, if let's say you're going to a tech publication that's not cybersecurity specific, then obviously you want to make inroads and have a lasting effect on their cybersecurity professional audience. How would the process be different than, let's say, if it was an AI, big data, space and defense, med tech, et cetera?
How you pitch the journalist?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Yes, I'm just curious. Does it change? Because I worry that the journalist might, if let's say they're getting pitched by a bunch of things across industries, that's something.
Mm-hmm.
And cybersecurity, generally speaking, let's say, isn't as sexy even as, let's say, AI or med tech that's more relatable
mm-hmm.
to people. Like, you know what I mean? Or food tech. So like, how do we get the attention of the journalist that is, let's say, B2B tech, but industry agnostic, be interested in picking up?
This is a really good question. I mean, the answer is, and it's, nobody wants to hear it, hard work. You need to investigate the journalist. A lot of people go on the software, and I have the software too, where you can pull up all the names of the journalists and you can reach out to them. That's great. But the next step is saying, I'm going to go through my list. I'm going to see the last 4, 5, 6 articles that they published. I'm going to look at their Twitter stream. I'm going to be able to quote them, because the more that you can get into their mind and the more that they know that you're reading them, then the more that you have this opportunity. So I'm going to go directly into it. And I'm going to say, if this person is talking on the periphery of cybersecurity, then I'm going to frame it less technical. If this is somebody whose core focus is exclusively cyber, I'm going to mention maybe another article that they wrote last week and try and cross it into it so it goes into their stream and their editorial calendar. Because when I'm talking about placement, I always need to think about, how can I get my customer story out there, but how can I also meet the needs of the journalist? Because the journalist will say, I need to do 2 articles this week. I have this cloud computing focus for Q2. I have this event that we're promoting at this point. How is this going to fit in? And if I can't understand that and I don't have enough stuff in the pipeline, it doesn't work. And that's also where it goes into the retainer process, where if a customer says, I want you to reach out, do this one thing, and then stop, it's very, very difficult to understand what the journalists are doing. When I have the relationship with the journalist, I can say, okay, I know that in your editorial calendar in 2 months from now, you have a space for this AI cybersecurity article. We can follow up there. It gives me the chance to kind of build that relationship and build that structure. Instead of just saying, I really, really hope this works right now. Well, that's working on my schedule instead of working on their schedule.
You started your answer with this term I don't hear very often, called hard work.
Yeah, so, I know.
What happened? I know there's a lot of spray and pray, I feel like, or like a lot of numbers and massive reach out, which obviously might get you published. Also, I think will hurt your brand amongst those the publications.
Yeah, I mean, I can say,
and the relationships is going to be able to get you consistently placed and actually give you any kind of medium or long-term ROI that, as hard as it to attribute to PR, you're not going to get, it's just all an ego play if you don't put in the hard work.
I can say when I first started out in PR 4 years ago or something, I was reaching out to podcasts and I was trying to get placement for my guest, and I reached out to all these people, and I reached out to this one guy and I was like, I think that your podcast is awesome. I'd really like to have my vendor there. And he's like, I don't have guests on my podcasts. If you listened to any of them, you would have known that,
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, I soured this relationship because I was a big moron, and it's like, you need to learn. If you don't spend 5 minutes with this person that's supposed to give you an hour plus of their time, and then this opportunity, that has financial value and has this ROI that we're talking about, you need to give them that chance and to care. And if you don't care, they know. And if they, on the other end, when you do care and you're sincere and you actually connect with them, I can go to a client and be like, oh, I think this person is perfect for you because the personality works well with your executive and it would frame you well, versus this other person where even though it might get the right audience, I don't think it's good for you. I don't think that your dynamic is going to work, because it's as much about how the person is framed about is as the opportunity itself.
Let's talk about podcasts. I want to jump straight into that. I'll make sure we have time. If let's say someone had, when would you say it's better to have a podcast? When's it better to when would you? Okay, let me take a step back. How does podcasts, let's say YouTube interviews or even lives like this one, how does that fit into the bigger PR picture? How should it be prioritized? What should they expect to get out of it? How much preparation is needed? Walk us through that process of all the way up to the setting it up and joining it, and then afterwards, and what to expect in the sense of attention or return or eyeballs or ear balls. That's not really a word, but you know about ears.
So I think the answer is everything and nothing. Yeah, it's with podcasts, it's very difficult to be able to see what the clear statistics are of who are listening, because it's not just on Apple Music, it's on Google Play, it's on Spotify, it's on streaming on various different sites. You know, the statistics that the vendors or the podcast will give you themselves are always kind of quirky. I think that the big idea is a mix of quantity and then doing enough testing amongst your peers and your audience to see what they respect. Because you can't say that this podcast is going to be the make it or break it, but you can see what are people listening to and then getting in front of that audience. Because I think, especially in cybersecurity, on my list, on the different podcasts that I'm, consistently looking out for and trying to place people, I think we have like 260 cyber podcasts. So it's a mix of quantity and then understanding what you intend to achieve with your audience. So if you're saying, I'm trying to be more approachable, then you have a lot more crossover. If you're trying to be more technical, there's different options, but it's really about positioning. For me, I use that as positioning for op-eds and the basis for when I'm really trying to push for press releases and to get that top coverage. Who is this company? How can I understand them? Well, if they have 3, 4, 5, 6 podcasts, executives talking about a couple different subjects, with respected industry leaders, then it gives that extra boost where your story or the funding or the partnership might not necessarily get you in the door fully.
Got it. Do you think also, I'm thinking here, right? So like if I was invited onto a podcast and let's say I were to have a strong personality, you're more likely you're more likely probably to be invited on or connected because you have a conversation with the individual. And then just like, so for those that don't know, have never done a podcast, or at least never done one live at least, when we're going to end this broadcast, Yehudah and I are going to hang on and just recap for a couple minutes. What did you think? What did we cover? And then we're going to go on our own way. Often, so you get on in advance, and then after, you get to really you get to have a one-on-one conversation with the host who speaks to a lot of people. And I find that that's a fantastic opportunity to say, when I'm hosting, hey, are you connected with this person, X, Y, or Z afterwards? I would love to have them on. And it's a great way to make a deeper connection and have other introductions.
It's almost like an analyst briefing, because like the idea with the analyst briefing is you're talking to these people who really understand the industry, and they're going to talk to everybody out there, and then they're going to talk to an executive and give them some ideas of what technologies or what companies should I really be investing in. And it's the same thing with the podcast host, because if this guy has their, this guy or this gal or whatever has their pulse on the radar, then they're going to be able to connect you with their other guests, and you're going to be able to be seen in that window. So when I'm doing placement, I'm also looking at the previous guests, because I think about my client is now in that pantheon. So if we can kind of visually connect it, then, for the next placement, I can say, Steve Wozniak was on this podcast and my guy was on this podcast. Obviously my guy's not the Woz, but we're getting in front of the same audience.
Right. Got it. Excellent. Miss Becker wrote, vendors rely too much on the PR agency to come up with ideas.
Yes.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is good. By the way, this is true for like sometimes ads, other things. They want to outsource all of their strategy to you almost. It is incumbent upon the vendor to appoint a qualified manager to, quote, feed the agency raw materials and often promotional ideas for campaigns, articles, media alerts. The PR agency is only as good as the food that they are fed. But not all PR agencies are alike. and not to beat a dead horse, but the more the retainer is, the more attention the vendor will receive. Agree or disagree? Let's start with the last sentence because I think that's a faster, shorter answer.
Mhm.
And then she put a lot here that's good to unpack.
Yeah.
Gosh, she's brilliant.
Yeah. Susan's really deep. And it's maybe we have to have a separate live with her. Oh, look at that. Did you see that? You see that?
No,
right
what?
there? We just brought people in. How can you get a placement? I just got Susan a placement. I don't. You don't. It's cool. So going through the end, do PR professionals pay more attention to the clients who pay the retainers versus who don't pay retainers? I mean, I think that
and the higher the retainer, she wrote specifically here, and not to beat a dead horse, but more the greater the retainer, the more attention the vendor will receive. I mean, I would say that's by default. Well, technically, she's saying, does money talk, right?
Yeah, does money talk? Well, I mean, it's obviously if somebody is paying 3, 4, 5 times more, you would have to give them more attention. I think that that's a structural issue with the agency, where the way that I approach my clients is, I have an a la carte menu, I have a retainer price, it's pretty accessible. And I try and understand, unless a client is going to say that their needs are going to be significantly more, because I time it out by hours, and, also on my end, I'm looking for results, and every client needs results. So
what do you say results? Just specify, please.
So if I'm doing podcast placement, the client is looking to get on a podcast. If I'm trying to get analyst briefings, they're trying to get in front of analysts. If we're trying to get op-eds, they need to have these opportunities. And it doesn't matter where they are. If they're a retainer, I have the opportunity to work more in this strategy and kind of place it holistically instead of just going this one track. But I think my obligations are the same. And I think that if you try and push somebody back into the funnel because they're paying less, you're not respecting them as a client. Everybody who pays for our services, they have joined the family. They are getting our services and they're getting what we pay for them. And you just get something different. So if the customer and retainer, they're signing up for a press release distribution and podcasts and something a little bit more creative and maybe a web, something like that, the time allocation is going to be different. But that's different than, this person is paying this and this person is paying that. We try and equalize it there and be fair. On the idea on the first part about the relationship of the marketing department in-house and feeding the PR agency ideas, that's huge. Because if you want the PR agency to be your content writers and to be your storytellers and to do this whole content media strategy for you, then you're going to have to pay more money and it's going to be a lot more involved. And then you're not really telling your story and it takes a lot of time going back and forth. I find that, if you want me to write an article, I think that that's very, very different than as a PR guy, what's going to be your entire strategy? What are your goals? That's you. That's your company and your objectives, and you need to be able to take charge. And if the PR people are begging you to kind of guide that, then it's going to be very difficult to get tangible results. I think that PR is really effective when you say, on a monthly or quarterly basis, whatever it is, these are the ideas that we're going for. These are the publications that we look for. These are the ideas of success. How can we run with that? So you give them a little bit of creative control, but you also set a clear boundary and a clear structure of what you're expecting, what the ideas are going to be.
Awesome. Terrific. So let's start to wrap up here. If someone was like, hey, I'm interested in cybersecurity PR, or I feel like I need PR for my cybersecurity startup or their company, what's other than obviously contacting you?
Yes.
Like, what's the first question they should ask themselves?
Like when I'm going to a client, I'm having this initial conversation. Are you a candidate for PR? We're always thinking about funding. Do you have money? Are you about to announce money? Do you have something in the pipeline that's going to be able to generate enough interest that a journalist is going to care? Because there's a million companies out there, and you need to make yourself known. Do you have enough products in the pipeline that if we get that initial story for you, that you have that funding, something is going to be able to come of it? Because as somebody who's trying to partner with a company, can I work with them for 3, 6, a year, 2, 5, 10 years? Do they have this idea? when I think about their executives and their planning, you know, do they have that coherence in their marketing team and with the executives that they can get things done? Because if you talk to the marketing team and they say, I can't really get through to the CEO, the CTO is kind of difficult, that means that every time that I have an opportunity, it's not going to happen, and then they're going to blow up at me about results.
Right.
So these are things that internally, externally, and then we have to really be honest with it, where it's, is this interesting and is this a story? You know, a lot of companies, I had somebody in Beit Shemesh come to me and say, it's like, I have this great idea. I think it's we could get a bunch of PR. It was more for a Jewish cause. And I was like, well, how many people are involved? It's like, well, once a month we get 20 people. And I was like, you think it's great. This is not actually a story. You know, is the scale and scope of your
It
product,
could be great, but it's not a story.
Exactly. Is the scale and scope of your product and your technology applicable to a broad audience? You know, are we talking about AI? Are we talking about, you know, a widget that doesn't make a difference? And all of these things come in there, and you have to, sometimes you roll the dice and you say, maybe this will work. But then with a client like that, I would say, you know, what are the expectations going to be? If you're going to be somebody who's on the fence of actually being a candidate for PR, we're going to say the expectation is going to be getting you onto podcasts instead of, you know, getting you in front of Gartner because you don't have, you know, 2-3 years in the pipeline where they can look back at your technology or your executives or your developers and really understand that. So it's setting realistic goals, and those people have opportunities too. But I don't necessarily think that a retainer is the best thing for them because it's a lot of money on their end, and the results aren't going to necessarily be coming, you know, at full speed.
Awesome. Yehudah, thank you so much for joining us. How can people follow you, find you, and reach out to you if they were interested in cybersecurity PR?
So they can check me out on LinkedIn. They can look up Yehudah Sunshine, Yehudah with an H at the end of it. They can email me at yehudah@cyfluencer.com. They can come visit me at CyberTech. They can come check out the Cyfluencer website. Oh yeah, we have a table. You guys should come and visit.
You're in the startup pavilion at CyberTech.
We're in the startup pavilion. We're going to have the best booze around, and also I hear.
Wait. Best booths or best booze?
The best booze with a Z or a Z, and we're going to even be giving away a custom bobblehead.
Sweet.
Everybody knows anybody in the Wadi family needs a bobblehead, so you could be part of that group too.
It's the one gift you can't get yourself.
And in some cases, the gift you can't get yourself twice.
That's true. Oh, right. That's true. Awesome. Great. If I was going to CyberTech, feel free to contact me. I'll be there too. Or Yehudah, feel free to send us a connection request. If you have any questions about cybersecurity PR, you can message Yehudah or me, and I'll connect you. Or cybersecurity ads or SEO. Someone asked, what time is the bar open? Find our table. We're always open. Thank you, Yehudah, so much for joining us, and good luck out there telling your cybersecurity story. And we're here to help if you need it. Thank you, Yehudah.
Feel good, everybody. Have a good day.